Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and we're here today for another episode of Page Chewing. And this time, on episode 45, I had to look up the title because there's so many of them now. But we are very thankful to be here with Gareth L. Powell. Thank you, Mr. Powell, for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And for those who aren't familiar with you or your work, can you give us an introduction?
Oh, okay. Sum myself up in a snappy soundbite. Yeah, I'm a science fiction writer based in the US. I've written 17 published books, 10 of which have been novels. I've won the BSFA award for best novel a couple of times. Um, First time I tied for first place with Anne Leckie for Ancillary Justice. And I think I'm one of the most shortlisted people in the 50-year history of the award. Um, my most recent novel, Descendant Machine, came out last week from Titan Books in the UK and the US. Um, and I'm here to talk all about it.
Nice. And of course, we're here with my lovely co-hosts, Taylor and PL. Will you give us quick introductions as well, please?
Sure. So I'm Taylor. My book channel is Made Between the Pages. As Steve just mentioned, I am a co host on Page Chewing, so you'll find me quite often on Steve's channel, and I'm just excited to be here.
And PL?
I'm PL Stewart. I'm an author and a blogger, and again, honored, like Taylor said, to be a co-host of Page Chewing alongside my wonderful compatriots in Steve and Taylor, where you can most often find me beside them on one of their channels, and soon to be mine in the future because I'm crazy enough to start thinking about starting a YouTube channel. So, yeah, I'm an indie author, and really excited to be here. Gareth is an icon in the writing community and someone who a lot of us look up to. I'm here embarrassing him now, but and of course as a writer. So yeah, can't wait to learn more about his work. I have read one of his books, like just that he co-wrote with Peter Hamlet. It was fantastic. I haven't had a chance to put a review up yet, but wow, this was marvelous. So very much looking forward to reading more of his work. So.
Nice. And we want to get into your congratulations on the book release last week. We want to get into that. We wanted to kick things off, and I think hopefully not too much of a depressing question to start off with, but we wanted to know what your vision was for our future.
Oh, well, I mean, it's all going to be fine. Um,
There we go. That's a good place to start.
it's going to be um, obviously it could go one of two ways, well, one of a million ways, but one of two main ways. And we have a couple of big existential crises facing us at the moment in the climate and the antibiotic resistance, and who knows, AI might rise up against us in the next couple of weeks. We seem to be sliding into a singularity at the moment. So, I mean, we've got no idea. I mean, obviously, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. And, I think I like to think that we have a future because obviously my job is about writing about it. So you could say that any science fiction set more than 20 years in the future is an act of outrageous optimism. But I like to think in my books, I like to think there are ways we can get through the troubles that are facing us somehow. And I think when the chips are really down, we will actually try.
I'm actually quite new to the genre myself, admittedly so. I'm coming from fantasy and I have picked up some sci-fi, over the years, and I've become more interested in it. And something that I find so interesting about it is often the thought experiments that are in the writing, right? So there's so much possibility with sci-fi, especially when you're talking about the future. And to hear you say that with to hear you say that you hope that there's a way to find our way through what we're going through at the moment, whatever that may be. Do you find that sci-fi helps you in those thought experiments, working through writing it? So when you're writing sci-fi, are you able to work through, okay, we have these issues, these are some ideas we could work with in the future. Do you think that it's a good thought experiment maybe for others to do as well?
That's one of the things that's so vital about the genre, is that you can set up any thought experiment. So, for instance, if you want to say, well, how would society be if we made X and Y changes? You can create that society and write about what it would be like to live there, and maybe think through the problems. Or, for instance, with the AI that's coming at the moment, a lot of people are kind of freaking out and going, "What the hell is this?" But sci-fi writers have been working through those questions and working through the implications for decades, and we're like, "Yeah, okay, we can see where this is going. We can see what's happening." Um, so it's a very good tool for mapping and modeling potential futures and what it would be like to live in them. I wouldn't lay any claim that it's predictive in any way. What we do, I mean, we're not trying to accurately predict. Well, I'm not trying to accurately predict the future. I'm trying to entertain people, but I'd like to have some, at least some plausibility in the stories. But from what I was saying, I mean, from how it helps me, I mean, I grew up in I'm a child of the 70s and 80s. So, I remember being a teenager in the 80s and being absolutely convinced we were all going to die in a nuclear holocaust. At any moment, we were having, drills at school, and there were public information films on the TV. So it was a very scary time. So I think our generation have kind of lived with that kind of existential, not dread, but that kind of background awareness that the entire world could end in 6 minutes or whatever. And I think that's kind of filtered through into my work quite strongly, especially in the book before this one, Stars and Bones, which came out last year, where I took a sort of daydream from my 80s self that it starts with, there is a nuclear war escalates, and just as it's about, everything's about to hit the fan, this kindly omnipotent alien comes down and puts a stop to it all and confiscates all our toys and puts us on the cosmic naughty step. And that was like very much as a teenager thinking, where are these aliens from Star Trek that can just step in and sort this stuff out, because we're not doing a very good job. So that's kind of it. There's that kind of wish fulfillment and working through those issues as well.
When you're writing your stories, do you make a conscious effort to not make it too grounded in reality, to not make it too close to current events, to whereas there's that buffer from reality and fiction?
Yeah, I mean, most of what I write is set in space. It has, with talking spaceships and talking cats, and so I mean, it's usually, quite a distance into the future. But I do like there to be some kind of sense about how we got there from here. So even if it's just like a 2 or 3 sentence things one of the characters said, there's that link to just show that how we got there. So it's not like it's not completely divorced from who we are and where we came from.
Okay. So, Gareth, what compelled you specifically to write science fiction? Was it that, perhaps, in school you had like a scientific quantitative background? Was it, what was the drive to write specifically in that genre for you?
Well, I mean, it's the genre I grew up in. I grew up in the very early 70s. I think the first time Star Trek was shown on UK TV, my mother used to sit me in front of Star Trek. I was about 3 or 4 years old on an old black and white TV, and I just, it seeped in. And then I was 6 or 7 years old when the first Star Wars movie came out. And then we had Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Battlestar Galactica and Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon. And it was just sci-fi tastic in the 70s, and that huge Star Wars cash-in that went on in Hollywood. And that was it. And at the same time, I was going to my local library, and they had a huge shelf of sci-fi, so I was picking up and reading the Robert Heinlein juveniles, which confused the hell out of me because I didn't have a clue what a slide rule was. They just weren't a thing in 70s in UK. But yeah, and I moved on from there to sort of Arthur C. Clarke, Larry Niven, and then eventually William Gibson and some more modern writers and so on. So it was very much the genre I kind of grew up loving. When I went to university, part of my course was creative writing. We were forbidden under pain of death to write science fiction. We had to write literary fiction and literary. So I would try and spite my teachers by fitting as much sort of stealth sci-fi in there as possible. So, and it's been a great source of satisfaction to me that I've gone on and got a career publishing science fiction, in spite of their advice. So
I hope we see a little snarky name in the thank yous in your books here and there for those teachers. But that is something that I think fans of fantasy and sci-fi can both commiserate on. That it's often looked down upon in those scenarios. But it's interesting hearing you mention Star Trek because my mother is also a Trekkie. And so the number of times I watched, Trouble with Tribbles when I was little, I remember that episode so clearly. And I'm curious if that was kind of one of your formative memories of the genre. Is there still something specifically from Star Trek that inspires you to this day? Is there something that's kind of been a through line from that specific inspiration point that you still find you lean on?
I guess it's the appreciation of sort of utopian cultures. So with Star Trek, I was exposed to, at a young age to a society without money, without, possessions, and universal healthcare, universal employment. What you could possibly look, what would be called kind of like a socialist utopia now, I guess. Luxury space communism, and so that was in the 70s, like the dark, deprived, economically dire 70s and 80s in the UK. That was, a shining kind of alternate utopia. And I guess reading through the culture novels of Ian Banks, which is a similar post-scarcity, highly technological society, and it kind of drew me to the sort of possibilities of technology, not in a kind of tub thumping technology is going to make everything brilliant way, but more in a kind of how can we use things to make our lives better? How could we make our lives fairer? And that's why in these last two books, Stars and Bones and Descendant Machine, it's set the human race is adrift in these gigantic arcs. But everyone in the ark has everything they need because it's a closed system. So they have clothes, they have food, they have healthcare. They're basically living in one of the Star Trek utopia. And people say it's very difficult to get drama in a utopia, but I've not found that. I've found you can make utopias very dramatic. So.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I think we're roughly around the same age. I was born in '69, so like you grew up in that same, the environment of the '80s and the '90s. Was a big Trekkie myself. I've watched all the series probably a million times with reruns because Star Trek's one of those things. It was so pervasive in terms of TV. I remember growing up, it would be on 3-4 times a day, right, in reruns. And of course, by then the series, by the time I was starting to watch, it was already the original series already in reruns. And of course, in later times, then all the new series with Next Generation and so on. And it's funny you hit on that thread, Gareth, about despite the fact that in your series it's utopian society, saying, okay, you figure, well, it's utopian society, so everything's perfect. How can you find the drama and the conflict that we look for in fiction? But I remember specifically for, I mean, you think about Star Trek, that so much of that conflict was created by humankind's thirst for exploration and bring us into contact with other species. And, in Star Trek, of course, we know at the heart of it is for Starfleet and their prime directive, this treading this line of non-interference with other forms of life, yet having to defend themselves if there's a conflict, wanting to make sure that societies don't go afoul, don't go astray. So I think when we talk about utopian societies, and obviously you write about them, do you think that there is hope for us to achieve some sort of utopian society? I mean, you write about them. I feel like in my heart, if you look back at you noted about writing something 20 years in the future is really a hit or miss, right? Because the technology changes so rapidly. Things that were predicted to happen much earlier in our future perhaps haven't, and some have come to fruition sooner than expected. But yeah, do you think we can ever achieve something like that based on today's
Well, I'd like to think so. I mean, technically we could achieve something like that today if the will was there. There are resources. Jeff Bezos by himself could end world hunger and still be a billionaire. We could lift. We could end poverty. We could end hunger. We could end deprivation. We could institute worldwide healthcare. But the will is not there because the system we have prizes scarcity as value and is predicated on a myth of eternal growth, which in the Earth being a closed system, eternal growth is not possible. But that's the kind of mindset that we're locked into at the moment, is the sort of acquisitive sort of late stage capitalism. I don't want to get too political or kind of whatever, but we're locked into a system which has so much inertia that I don't know how we'll ever break it in order to restructure it to make life fairer and easier for the rest of us. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of stuff about universal basic income coming in, which sounds like a good step in the right direction to at least, let people have money to invest in their own healthcare, and start their own businesses and so on. So but if change comes, it will either come hugely fast, or it will be a very slow drip, drip, drip change. But so many powerful, loud groups seem to be dragging us back at the moment, trying to drag us back to this mythical kind of 1950s past where white picket fences and no wives in aprons in the kitchen, and it's frustrating that we have the means, we just don't have the will to implement it at the moment.
I think the use of the word inertia is really interesting there, because as humans, as a human race, that you are correct, that is part of what we are. I think, and it can be a blessing, both a blessing and a curse. I think this need to continuously move in some direction that we're already shifting towards, and the inability to kind of stay still as a race, I guess I could say. I think it's different culturally. Different cultures definitely prioritize different things, but as people from the West, I think culturally we also value that. But I would argue, at least to me, it seems like human nature in and of itself is to continuously move forward. Would you agree with that statement, or do you think that that's simply something we've gotten used to thinking is normal?
Well, I mean, we're essentially very curious monkeys, and we like to poke beehives with sticks. to see what will happen. And
Yeah.
part of that, we're descended from people who explored the world on foot, and I think there is part of that, but we've also evolved a way of transmitting our culture down the generations. And the unfortunate side effect of that is it tends to sort of imply a stability of culture. So there are some forces in society at the moment that are trying to keep everything the same in stasis. Whereas there are other, there's technological developments and things that are sort of racing ahead of where our cultural development is, because we have this thing called tradition, which is basically peer pressure from dead people. And it stops us doing, it stops us maybe keeping up with our own capabilities as fast as we can, or dealing with the ramifications, because we still have these ingrained kind of prejudices and biases against certain technologies, or certain that are opinions that have been filtering down through the culture for hundreds of years. And these are just I mean, we're still seeing, basically, the American Civil War is still playing out psychologically, because there are people who've just inherited those from their grandparents and their grandparents. And it's not that long ago, to be honest. And that's still playing out. And it's been playing out through the 60s, and it's playing out now. And so we have these, as you say, this cultural inertia that once things are in place, we try and keep them there, even while part of the rest of culture is racing ahead. And what we've had over the last 30, 40 years has been a huge cultural explosion in arts and music and so on. And now I think there's and in freedoms and rights, and we're seeing now a certain bounce back and a certain pushback against that, and people are saying, well, no, we need to get this back to traditional values. And I think that's going to be the big fault line in the next few decades, because that culture war, the things that we really need to do, like address the climate crisis and address world hunger and so on, have been caught up into this culture war, which is not a good thing, because it means instead of things that actually need to be addressed, they're now like trendy subjects that only one half of the debate will engage with and the other half won't. So I think that is going to cause a lot of trouble over the next few decades, definitely.
I just have to say, peer pressure from dead people is going into my lexicon.
That's not my line. I think I saw that on Twitter or Facebook a while ago. Stuck. I can't remember who said it.
Very nice. But a couple of comments really quickly. Excuse me. Our friend Daniel comments, I always thought the slow drip change would work, but the longer I live, the more I think the opposite to treating people well, as opposed to seeking profit, will preclude anything but revolution. And our good friend Chris, well said, I hope one day in my lifetime we will see that win out. Until then, we have all the speculative fiction. And Daniel, people are associating the self with their culture and imposing regressive ideas on others, and them sublimating in their personal fear of death. And LTF, good morning. I feel egoism is a big showstopper.
Yeah, and I wonder, one thing that brings to mind this discussion is, in reading Light Chaser, Gareth, what struck me about this book, extremely well done. There were so many things, and this book is about time travel and all sorts of things. One thing struck me about this book and thing was that, is it better to remain blissfully ignorant and unaware of what your real circumstances is, if it seems that at least what would optically from other people seems you're happy, you're content, you have all those creature comforts, you have or is it better to know how dire your circumstances actually are? Is it better to, especially if you figure, and this always brings the climate crisis into my mind. Is it or you can look outside right now and there's it's a cloudy day, but other than that, in a little bubble there seems fine, right? But realizing that it's not fine. So is that always fascinates me, and is that something that in this book in particular you wrote about in terms of kind of blissful unawareness of what your circumstances are versus the reality of what's happening?
This is sort of like the character of Cypher in The Matrix, who
Yeah.
wants to be put back in and have his memory of how awful the outside world actually is erased, so he can just enjoy living in blissful ignorance. And there is there's definitely a huge attraction to ignorance. I would love to think, climate change bad, not going to happen. Rise of fascism won't affect me, and and just get on with life. And there's definitely, we all have our own moments of complacency, and we all have moments when we just want to just pretend everything's fine. And like that dog in the meme, with sitting in a burning house drinking tea, saying this is fine. Yeah, we all do that, and to some. I've had my own kind of struggles where I think, well, I write books about spaceships for a living. Am I really helping in any way? And the arguments for and against that. So I just try and, I never want to be a preachy author, or, I'm writing books that are fun and books that are entertaining that I enjoy. But my beliefs and my worries come through in them. Inevitably, because you have to put everything of yourself into a book to make it authentic and true. So obviously a lot of that comes through. Maybe if that helps people understand, maybe if the post-scarcity society in my most recent couple of books has the same effect on me that watching on other people that had Star Trek had on me when I was young, of seeing this alternative way of living, and maybe thinking maybe we can come round to something that's a little bit fairer and a little bit more equal for everybody.
This book also delves into AI and the role of AI in their interactions with humanity, and what role AI will play. Will it be necessarily a benevolent role, and a role that whereby AI is assisting us and helping us, and is not necessarily autonomous, and is not necessarily making decisions, for us? Or is it something a bit more sinister? And we talked about your vision for the future, specifically, and AI, as we mentioned, has all kinds of implications for all kinds of things, and specifically for we writers, it definitely has a lot of, I believe, somewhat scary implications that are being hotly debated right now. Where do you see AI going in terms of humanity, specifically in the coming years?
I think AI is like any other tool, that it can be repurposed as a weapon, and it can backfire. So, and it's also, I think, like a child, that it will, as it's raised, is how it will grow. As the twig is bent, so grows the branch. It's we could raise it, and I think there's a high possibility somebody will try and raise it to become an autonomous battlefield application with drones and those creepy dog robots and things. They're bound to try but I think, on the other hand, a lot of the fear of AI that we see, fear of and here I'm not talking about the chatbot things. I'm talking about true AI, sentient application. And I think a lot of the fear of it is that if we create something more intelligent and more powerful than us, will it treat us the way we would if we were in that position? So I think that there's a bit of a mirror there, that we worry that. I think a lot of this goes on in a lot of the human rights and sort of gay rights and things. It's like, if we give everybody the same rights as us, will they treat us as badly as we've treated them? And there's that fear. So I think the same with AI in some way, in that we think, well, obviously it will enslave us all and, use us as batteries in its power plant and Terminator robots, because kind of that's what we would do. So hopefully, we might create something that is slightly more intelligent than that and sees the world as a very small island of life and intelligence in a vast cosmos, and decide that it needs preserving and work with us and for us to help us and preserve. Alternatively, there might be there's what's the name of that game with the folding blocks?
I know, Minecraft?
Tetris.
Oh, Tetris.
Tetris. Oh, okay.
I heard about an experiment where they tried to program an AI to not lose at Tetris. So because it keeps coming down, and if the blocks were so it was not to lose at Tetris, so it paused the game. So they might decide, well, we're going to preserve all life, so we're going to just put the whole of the Earth into storage. Or they might help us, or they might decide that we're too much of a threat to their power source and wipe us out. Who knows? I mean, it could go any way. I tend to have AIs as quirky and helpful in my books because I think they make fantastic characters, and I think the old scary AI thing has been done to death. I mean, it's there are episodes of Star Trek in the '60s where there were computers telling people to kill themselves and stuff, and it was all going until Kirk showed up and pointed out it was stupid, and then they decided to reorganize their whole society. So
it doesn't count until he says it. So I think that comment about a mirror is really interesting, because when you think about it, any story that I've seen with AI not ending horribly is seen almost as, naivete, or making up this utopia that's definitely not going to happen. But I really like the point you made about it being a mirror, because the fact that we can only see this ending badly, our creation acting the way we would, I think that's a really poignant way to put that. I know, like, the Murderbot series is very popular, and a lot of that is because it has that kind of quirky feeling to it and doesn't have that doom and gloom feel, which I think for many people felt fresh when they first picked it up. So I think you really have a point there.
Also, they're sort of using Star Wars as a case study for AI as well, where it never evolved into this enormous godlike intelligence. It just remained at a normal kind of human level, and so you just have all these droids wandering around, kind of like an underclass, and fairly expendable with the combat droids and stuff. But they are AI. They're wandering around. It's just become part of the furniture.
Daniel commented, I Googled the peer pressure from dead people line and was pleased to see it attributed to Ice-T. But then I found the same line in a vampire romance novel published a year earlier than that tweet. It's interesting.
Ice-T, yeah.
Maybe we've just outed Ice-T as a vampire romance reader.
That's going to endear him to so many more people.
Yeah. Oh.
I hope that's true. God, I hope that's true.
Me too. That'd be great.
That'd be awesome. I wanted to bring it. I know with some fascinating conversations we have here about AI, especially. I want to bring it back a little bit outside of that discussion to more book specific stuff in terms of you wrote this wonderful book with Peter F. Hamilton, sorry, and you've written dozens and dozens of short stories. You've written 2 dozen novels yourself. This one is co-written. What's it like to co-write, to co-author a book with another author. And I mean, I found that here the prose was seamless. I don't know how you wrote it, or whether one author wrote one chapter, etc. But it sounded like one authorial voice is what I'm saying, right? So what's it like to co-author a book like this with someone else?
It was a lot of fun, actually. It was, I guess, the nearest I can do is probably like two guitarists jamming on the same record or something. But it was, yeah, when we decided to write something together, we threw a few ideas around, and eventually we came up with a kind of, I'd throw over an idea for a character, and Peter would come back with a society that would model that, and then we'd come back, and we went back and forth quite a lot. And then when we had something we thought had legs, I went over to his office, and we sat there, and we kind of just broke it down into like scenes. We'll need a scene here, we'll need a scene there, we'll need a scene here, we'll need a scene on this society, blah blah blah. And it was like, well, I'll write that bit, you write that bit. And we just divvied it up, and I wrote most of the scenes set on the starship with the sort of character-based stuff, and he wrote most of the different societies. But we kind of, did you ever play that party game as a child where you write a sentence and then fold the paper over, and then the next child writes the next sentence, and then you come up with this story? That's how we did it. He would write a chapter and send it to me, and then I'd write the next chapter and send it back. And then, so that if we wrote them all out of order, I don't think they would have felt as cohesive. So doing it that way, we could read back, and so we could write sort of cohesively with what had gone before. And then afterwards, we both edited it. So both our voices kind of crossed into the other. So that's, I guess, why it feels quite seamless. But also, we our kind of styles seem to mesh pretty well, which wasn't something I was expecting, because obviously he writes books the size of phone books, and I write slightly much shorter, sort of fast-paced stuff. So, but it was a lot of fun. It was a huge amount of fun, and I got to read new Peter Hamilton fiction before anyone else, which was kind of cool. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. I again, love the book. There were a lot of things, so many things in here. Like a timeless love story. The one thing again that struggled with this book was that was frankly, and I say this, it's the only problem is the prose was fantastic, right? It was the prose was wonderful, and sometimes very lyrical and poetic, and of course dealing with some big themes here. But I understand that from what I'm gathering about you is that you're a character driven writer. So your books are, which appeals to me as a reader, because I'm very much a character driven reader, and I think a character driven writer myself. So in terms of this collaboration, like you said, so was it you more focusing on the character based stuff in this novel? Is that how it worked?
Yeah, I mean, Peter put in a lot of stuff about strangelets and subatomic particles and physics, and I let him do that because he knows that stuff better. And the thing I know is how to write characters, and my spaceships tend to be quite, I like to make them plausible, but I don't know how they work. So whereas he's much more kind of has that much more technical frame of mind.
So and in saying that, so your series, your main series, I guess, that you're best known for, Embers of War, I believe. So that essentially would be, if we're looking to kind of like your sales pitch for that, it's a character-based, driven, like more space opera kind of thing. Can you talk a bit about that series?
Definitely. Well, yeah, it's a trilogy. It starts with Embers of War, and it's character-based. It's told by a group of 5 or so narrators. One of whom, who is arguably the main character, is a sentient warship who has resigned following an atrocity that was carried out to end a very destructive war. But she accidentally developed a conscience, which is the last thing you need in a warship. So she resigned, and obviously warships have never resigned before, so that was kind of weird. And she's gone off and she's joined this rescue organization, and she's a very interesting character because she's struggling to work out who she is. A lot of her neural architecture is based on stem cells from a dead soldier that they've used to kind of create this AI, and they've cut it in with canine DNA to give her a pack loyalty to the rest of the fleet. And separated from that, and with her armament gone, she's kind of struggling to be good and to be helpful, but at the same time, she's kind of hardwired to blow things up. And so she's kind of like and it's that teenage at one point I think she says that she's a teenage girl with all the social graces of a missile, and that's kind of her struggle. And I think for some reason that's really resonated with a lot of people, because I think we've all been teenagers and we've all been, where do I fit in, what do I do, what's the struggle between being good and just giving vent to my anger and my feelings. And through the two sequels, Fleet of Knives and Light of Impossible Stars, she and her crew go through this huge experience, accidentally awaken something very ancient and powerful. The whole of humanity is in jeopardy. They struggle, they fight, they lose comrades, they gain new comrades. But the main kind of overarching storyline is her struggle to become who she is, find out who she is and become who she is. And I think that's really, a lot of people write to me and say, oh my God, Trouble Dog is my favorite character. I love Trouble Dog. And I'm really pleased because I enjoyed writing her so much that I'm really glad she struck a chord.
Well, you've sold me on that. I am also very much a character-based reader. And as you know, I admitted, yeah, Steve too, right? All of us. And as someone who already admitted I am admittedly new to the sci-fi genre, something that is always, I think, daunting for people making the leap maybe from fantasy is the science part of that, the science part of the name. Because you're maybe afraid that you won't understand something that's crucial to the story. So I really love hearing the way that you talk about this series and the themes that you talk about. And this is a little bit more broad, just talking about the writing experience, saying that you enjoyed writing these characters so much. But PL often talks about as an author how difficult it is to write maybe the second book in a series or the third book in a series. It's a different challenge from the first one. So I'm curious, as someone who feels so deeply for your characters, of that trilogy, which one was the hardest for you to write? The first, the second, or the last?
Actually, it was the last one. I wrote the second one really quickly after writing the first one. But then when I came to write the third one, the first one had just come out and had come out to very, very good reviews, and people were, So suddenly I felt performance anxiety. It's like with the second one, I just wrote it and it was fun and I got it, I did it. With the third one, it was like, oh crap, now I'm going to have to tie this series up in a way that satisfies these people who are really enjoying book one. So suddenly it was, suddenly the safety net had gone, and I thought, oh God, I have to stick the landing. I have to deliver. So that was the that was the most difficult. And during the course of the trilogy as well, there were a couple of character deaths that hit me quite hard as well. That I kind of thought, oh, wish I hadn't killed them off. So, but yeah, it's.
I always love hearing when authors say that, because it's like you have the control, but it seems like the way authors talk about it, you almost don't. Like this needed to happen, so you suffer along with the readers almost.
Well, I think if you create authentic characters, then you kind of can predict how they would respond and how they would act and what they would do in certain situations, then you have to be true to that. Because if you suddenly make them act in a way that is different in order to satisfy your plot, I think it comes across as quite contrived. So sometimes you kind of follow their decisions and they paint themselves into a corner, and you think, well, the only way I can get them out of this is to do something really contrived and really artificial, or make them act in a way that the reader's going to go, hang on, what? She wouldn't do that. So you have to follow through. So
Have you ever found yourself killing a character and then later on down the line, because you needed that character for something else, you just changed your mind, went back and saved them? Have you ever done that?
kind of. I wrote a trilogy called the Akak Makak trilogy, and it was basically the first book was basically a murder mystery, and the guy is murdered before the beginning of the first book, but left a kind of an electronic brain state recording that his ex-wife picks up and plays, and she can interact with, and that was just a way to kind of give a few clues and to get the mystery going and to show the relationship between the two of them. But the guy was dead. It's just an electronic recording, and I didn't think anything more of it. But he was still there at the end of the third book, because the relationship that developed between the two of them became so fascinating that I just couldn't kill him off. He was dead before the first book started, but he just hung around as this electronic ghost, and his awareness of himself as a recording. At one point she takes him to his own funeral, so he knows that he's a recording. But the way that they are able to build a relationship that is very different from the relationship they had when he was alive, because obviously he's her ex-husband, but now they develop something much closer and much more real when a lot of the stuff has been stripped away. That he and people kept writing to me and saying, I just want to give him a big hug, and stuff. So it's like he was supposed to be just dead and gone by the end of chapter 2 of the first book, but he was still there at the end of the trilogy because he just demanded to be.
Yeah, I found that there are some characters. It seems like you feel the same, Garrett. That they've just demanded more agency, and they're just kind of taken on this role that you didn't necessarily anticipate. Even if your story's pretty well plotted out, and you know what's going to happen. Perhaps you've given someone a larger role than you first thought, because this character just speaks to you, and you just feel that they're so compelling. You need to do something more with it, and that's kind of a fun experience as an author, to have a character just kind of, you got to give you more page time.
There's a very famous example of that, which is Moby Dick, where Melville originally had a different main character in mind, but then as soon as he met Ahab, he just threw the other character literally overboard and concentrated on Ahab, because he just found it. Yeah, and he couldn't be bothered to go back and rewrite the beginning, so he just carried on. But yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because you were reading Moby Dick, haven't you been, Taylor? You've been reading Moby Dick?
I was just about to say I've been triggered. Yes. I had a classics challenge on my channel. And then Moby Dick, while I have really enjoyed my process of reading it so far, for some reason I just hit like a mental block, and that put a stop to that challenge. And I've been reading it since last year. So I haven't gotten the literal thrown overboard part yet, but I'm about to be there. So that'll add some context, I think. Yeah, I mean, I'm enjoying it, though. It's a good book.
Braver than I am. Daniel had a comment. Ancient and powerful along the lines of a fire upon the deep, or is that not a good comparison?
Kind of a comparison, yeah.
So, just wondering too, as well, Gareth. You mentioned a lot of. I know, like you, I did read quite a bit of sci-fi when I was younger. As for some reason, I wavered over to fantasy, and then of course I ended up writing it. But Philip K. Dick and Asimov, and a lot of these writers, I read when I was younger. Who are your influences? You think the great writers of the genre? Who are the people that really inspired you to?
I think different writers inspired me at different times. I think this, I tried to write sci-fi for ages, and I was writing kind of Arthur C. Clarke, Larry Niven type stuff, which I wasn't really. It wasn't. I wasn't really having a much success with it because it was all alien invasions where the president is, and I don't know anything about presidents or what it's like to be in Cheyenne Mountain or whatever. So suddenly I picked up this copy of Burning Chrome by William Gibson, his short story collection. And it was all about people on the street. It was about normal people trying to live normal lives, trying to get by. And then seeing that with like the movie Alien, which is just about some, people there to get their bonuses. And, they're not heroic space captains or whatever. They're just normal people. And that kind of flicked a switch in my head, and suddenly I knew I just had to start writing about normal people. I just had to start writing about people I knew, and that made all the difference. Suddenly, I was writing about characters. I was not, instead of writing about these kind of big, unwieldy situations, I was writing about characters, and I was writing about things that are important to people, and that really kick-started my career properly. That's and I found my voice, and everything led from there really. Mentioned earlier Ian Banks. I guess he would be a huge influence, and yeah, I mean, so many of it is difficult to Ursula Le Guin. Yeah, I mean, there are so many. It's difficult to pick them out, but yeah, definitely. That was definitely a turning point with the Gibson and Alien and Aliens.
If someone were to ask you where the best place to start with your work is, what would you recommend? Where would you recommend they start with your work?
Well, Embers of War is a very good place to start. It's the first of a 3-book trilogy, but you can read it as a standalone because it's a fairly self-contained story, and it's probably quite accessible. It's about a warship and there's big, huge, enormous space stuff going on, but I explain it very simply. It's like the comparison I make was if I was writing a story set in the modern day and I wanted my character to jump in the car and go to Aldi, I wouldn't have like 3.5 pages explaining the internal combustion engine and the history of American-Arab relationships to do with OPEC, and so they would just get in the car and go. So that's kind of what happens. They get in the spaceship and go, and it's I imply how it works, but not only to the level of you put the petrol in this end and you go. So rather than getting into all that kind of deep, heavy scientific stuff. So.
To continue a little bit on the topic of inspiration, you obviously have these authors who inspired you to write the way that you do. And who have inspired you to write the type of characters that you do. But these characters have to have a place to live or a place to inhabit. And in a lot of your books, this is space, right? So I happen to be very lucky that my father worked on the James Webb Space Telescope, which is, has all of these amazing, incredible pictures coming through. One picture has thousands of galaxies in one snapshot. So I'm wondering if real world space things, whatever that may be, if those help inspire the settings for your stories, for these characters to inhabit, because space is infinite. There's an infinite number of stories and settings you could play with. So I'm wondering where you kind of pull that inspiration from.
Yeah, I mean, I do find those kind of pictures hugely inspiring. And when I was a kid, as well as, Star Trek, Star Wars, we also had the Skylab was up at the time. So we on TV seeing astronauts floating around and, bouncing off each other and doing all that. There was still Saturn launches going on and so on. So, and then the space shuttle came along, and, we were pretty much sure that we would all be living on Mars by 1984. And obviously, for better or worse, that didn't happen, but that seemed inevitable. It seemed that the space shuttle would happen, and then we would get, and so it felt like we were standing on the edge of that future, and that was very inspiring to be into sci-fi and to think, well, we've got all this to look forward to. This is all going to happen. So we've kind of lost that a bit now, I think. But at the time, yeah, that was a huge inspiration. I find the like the James Webb photos and stuff and the Hubble photos, they inspire some of the more philosophical parts of my books, I think, because you look at that and you think, well, there's 1,000 galaxies and each galaxy has 300 billion suns, and there could be millions of intelligent races just in that one photograph. But that one photograph, the light from those galaxies has taken millions of years to get here. So even if they were there now, we couldn't possibly see. We have no way to detect them, and they have no way to detect us. And by the time, if we ever do receive signals from them, we'll have been gone for millions of years. So it's, we'll never know. Basically, there could be huge galactic empires just there, and we just won't see them because by the time their signals or their light get to us, we'll have been gone. So that's quite that kind of sense of cosmic smallness, but at the same time of how significant we are. There's a lot of that especially in the most recent novel. There's a lot of pontificating from a very old starship about our place in the cosmos and what it means and how we will never know for sure what's going on now. So
it's amazing. So can you tell us a bit about the new novel, Gareth, and what you've done with your new release? Congratulations again, by the way.
Thank you. The new novel, it's set in the same universe as Stars and Bones, but they're both standalone novels. You can read them in any order. But they're both set in as I mentioned, this fleet where humans tried to blow themselves up and the aliens stepped in and shooed us off Earth and put us in this fleet of gigantic arcs and let us go off through the universe on the strict instructions we don't mess up any more biospheres. And so we're like cruising through the universe in these 1,000 arcs, and there are sort of smaller scout ships that go off ahead of the fleet to kind of scout the territory ahead and get into various scrapes and trouble. And in Descendant Machine, they discover a giant ring the size of Saturn's rings with a dark globe the size of the planet Earth in the middle, and it's a machine. And there's a small race of caretaker aliens who were there, who maintain the machine, but they've lost in their history what the machine is or what it does or how it works. They've got legends, and they have a holy man who is the custodian of the two big secrets. And then, so when one faction decides they want to open the machine because they think inside must be a wormhole to their technological ancestors who built this thing, and so they decide, we're going to make our planet great again. We're going to open this machine and reclaim our places at the top of the universal tables and things, and it becomes very populist. And then there's another faction who most of the humans are on, which is like, we think that's probably holding something really nasty in, so it's probably best not to open it. And so there's a race between the two factions to see whether, who could get these two great secrets first and what happens when it opens. So
that's fascinating. It sounds
Pandora's
great.
box in space.
Yeah. Well said. What made you decide to continue this novel in the same broader universe that your other series was set in, instead of going on to something completely different?
Well, when I finished the Embers trilogy, I wanted to create a new universe in which to tell stories. So I came up with this idea for Stars and Bones, this scenario, and I talked to my publisher, and they were like, what we really want and what we'd really like to see is some standalone novels set in the same setting, because that is much more attention grabbing for readers than picking up a book and thinking, oh, I have to read another 3 books before I can read this one. So there's like a sense of a series, but at the same time, they can just pick them up in any order, and it's more engaging for reviewers and readers and so on. So we decided to give that a try. So I built the setting in such a way that I could tell many different stories in that setting. And I may, at the moment, I'd have no more plans for that setting beyond those 2 books, but I could always return to it at any point if I think of a story that would suit.
Fantastic. Now I have a question
Someone
that.
needs to-
Sorry.
Oh,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
No,
Just
go
a
ahead.
comment on that, which is someone needs to tell fantasy authors that, because the number of series where it's like you got to read 8 books first. It was just a comment on that. That's all.
That's a good point. I better take that. I better take that under advisement. A couple of questions, 2 that are burning me. I'm going to ask the first one first. Was that so, Gareth? You've obviously, you're a very decorated writer. You won awards. You've written all these books. Do you feel has this all the success and all the accolades? Do you feel that's more pressure or less pressure? So, in other words, you've been a best-selling author. You've won, these writing awards. You've written successfully series, short stories, all these things. Does that make things easier in terms of when you sit down and write a book? Okay, I know my craft. I'm working for continuous improvement. However, I have a foundation, and I'm, or do you feel, is it more of the pressure of the success? Okay, well, I have to, write a better novel each time or a better short story. How do you feel about that?
It's an interesting question. I mean, it's not all kind of cocaine parties and groupies here. It's not quite kind of that situation. I mean, one thing I've always tried to do is try to make every book I write better than the one before. And I think if I ever got to the point where I was just knocking something out for the sake of it, I think that complacency would kill it and kill any talent I had. So I'm always striving to make each book as just as good as I can make it, and put in as much as I can, like as much truth and authenticity and stuff as I can. So I mean, it's always, I never feel that I've made it. I guess maybe if I won a Hugo and got a movie contract or something, I was sitting in a house in the canyon in Hollywood, whatever, I might think, well, yeah, okay. But I never, sadly, the financial rewards for my levels of success are not what you might hope. So I never kind of look back and think I made it. I'm always thinking, well, I've got to get another book deal. I've got rent to pay, so let's keep writing, let's keep going, and I just want to tell as many stories as possible.
Oh, you're very humble. So yeah, no, that's fantastic. But congratulations on all the success that you have achieved. So no doubt, and I don't doubt that one day you will. I know you've been nominated for a Locust before, I'm not mistaken, and so no doubt that that book deal, that movie deal is coming down the road. So we might see all your stuff on the big screen or the small screen, depending. So. So my second burning question is that you are also married to another author. So that's it. So how does it, so do you guys bounce ideas? I don't want to try to pry too much. Do you guys bounce ideas off each other? What's that like, being married to a fellow and very successful fellow author?
It's a huge amount of fun. Yeah, we do. I mean, we'll kind of we chat all the time on WhatsApp and on Zoom, so we'll just kind of send each other a page or two of what we're working on, or a chapter of the latest thing we're doing, and or a story or something, and read it and kind of bounce these things backwards and forwards. So that's really, it's really fun just to have somebody who completely gets it and knows what it's like to do this, and to who, I mean, she's a fantastic writer. She's whenever she gives me feedback, it's extremely incisive and spot on. So and just to have somebody who can, because sometimes writing a novel is very lonely, because it takes like 6 months or something, and it's not like if you work in an office, you can turn to the guy on the desk next to you and go, this job fucking sucks, doesn't it? And chat, and so you can't, but having being married to somebody who gets that and who understands, and there's a great feeling of sort of mutual support there. So.
That's amazing.
I know you've also written a nonfiction book, right? About writing, I believe is the title. So just while we're talking about the craft of writing, yes, there we go. You also, I know, have Q&As on Twitter and things like that, where you like to give out advice to fellow authors. So is there, maybe there isn't, there is no catch-all, but is there a base level, like a basic level of advice that you would give anyone who maybe doesn't have that person to bounce it off of, doesn't have a partner who knows what it's like? If someone's watching this and is really trying to work on their craft, what's something that you think could be universally applied?
Coffee. No, I mean,
always a winner.
I try not to give prescriptive advice, like you must do this or you must do that, and you don't do that. So in the book, it's much more encouraging, and like, this is what's worked for me, but won't necessarily work for you. But here are some approaches you might like to try, and here are some other approaches you might like to try. So I try very much to be more of a coach and a just gently push people onwards than actually sit there and wag my finger and tell them what they should and shouldn't do. When it comes to very, very basic advice, I mean, just read. I mean, read good books and find out why they're good. Read bad books and find out why they're bad. If there's a book you hate, go through it with a marker pen and find all the bits you hate. And if there's a book you love, what is it you love about it? And just read critically, read as a writer, and just think, but also read to fill up the mental aquifer, so that you have to keep refilling that. You have to keep refilling the creativity wells, and that's basically it. I mean, I've sadly, I've done some, quite a few workshops at universities and so on around the Europe and what have you, and there will always be a student who, well, I don't really read, or I'm writing this fantasy epic, 9-book fantasy epic. Really? But I don't read fantasy, but I think it's quite commercial, so I decided to write fantasy. And it's just like, and their story is like the most basic cliched rubbish that could so easily have avoided by just reading some stuff and seeing how other authors have approached it and avoiding all the pitfalls. And oh man, sorry, I'm just having flashbacks to that guy. So why would you write the first five books of a fantasy series when A, you don't know anything about fantasy, and B, you haven't even sold the first one yet? I mean, the sheer amount of effort for, and there was no way he was ever going to sell it, because it was dreadful. But just to expend that amount of effort on something without getting any feedback, or without, it boggles my mind. So don't do that. Don't do that. Read lots of books, and take heed of what you're reading, and read actively is, I think, would be my basic, most basic, don't even pick up a pen unless you've done this advice.
Yeah.
As a fellow reader, I love that. Sign off on that one.
Yeah, that's some great advice that I hold dear as well. Gareth, what would you say to that, specifically that advice? And I totally concur. I think Stephen Taylor, myself, we all do. What would you say to that advice? I've heard, and everyone's different. Some writers, for example, say that they have issues or troubles reading too much while they're writing because they find that they can get an imprint of those particular authors' works on their own, or they start to mimic the style of the authors they're writing, or that they have a hard time concentrating on their own, where they're going with their books. What do you say about to that? I don't have that issue, but that doesn't mean it's not valid. It doesn't mean that some people might not feel that. I don't have that issue. I find it helps me, as you said, like the more I read, I feel the better I write. But how do you address that, something like that, if that's your concern?
I mean, I don't have that so much. I mean, I understand it in that if I'm writing something in the first person and I've been reading something in the third person, sometimes I'll sit down and I'll start writing in the third person and I catch myself, oh, damn it, and have to go back and change it. But I tend to like to start the day by reading for a little while, like 15, 20 minutes of reading, because it just kind of keys the brain into the kind of rhythms and the fiction mindset. It kind of opens that door in the head just to kind of get into just the words and rather than just sitting down cold. So and I'll it doesn't matter what it is. It can be non-fiction, it can be whatever. I don't find it carries over. Because I've very much got my own kind of voice now that seems to have appeared, but so at the moment I'm reading Stephen King's The Stand for the first time because Diane could not believe I had not read it, so I was tasked to read it. So I'm reading that, and that's very, very different from what I'm writing and quite different from the way I write, but I'm finding it really I find if you read something that fires your imagination, and then when you go to write, your imagination is warmed up and it's fired and it's kind of already thinking, so you can apply that energy to your book. I find reading a great warm up for writing. But different folks have different experiences.
Well, that's great advice. Using reading as something to propel your, get those creative juices going on. That's great advice, I think. So, you've also, I mean, you do so much. You're a writer. The book you've written on writing with some writing advice. Thanks for writing that. That's something that I think all of us who aspire to write or who are currently writing can use. That's great, especially from.
I wrote that one by accident.
How so? Can you tell us about that?
Well, when I started off writing, I had a blog back in the. Does anyone remember the old blogger.com days? I had a blog, and so I would just kind of write about the stuff I was finding out as I was going along to help other people who were coming along. So it's stuff that I'd never, stuff I was not taught in school, like about passive and active voice, how to write a synopsis, all that kind of stuff. So I was writing this all as a blog. And then when I left that, I kind of backed up all the posts into a Word document, and it came out like 60,000 words or something. And I tweeted, "Oh, I just seem to have accidentally written a book." And the publisher just came back and said, "Yes, we will publish this." So that's how it came about. So obviously there was some editing and tidying, and it originally came out from a small publisher, and then Galant's took it and they brought out a much expanded hardback with an extra 20,000 words of new stuff in there. So, but yeah, I never set out to do that. I mean, my imposter syndrome would not have let me do that if I'd sat down on page 1 to do it. But yeah, so it kind of just came about from my experiences. That's why I called it a field guide, because it's all stuff that I learned and wrote in the field as I was going through, rather than sat and wrote about later.
Are there any lesser known authors or series that you would recommend, or that more people should be reading that aren't necessarily on the radar that you've you'd wanted to spread the word about?
Well, I mean, obviously, Diane has a 4-volume space opera series called the Questrisan Saga, which if you look her up on at JDiane with 2 N's, Dotson on Instagram or Twitter, you can find links to her page and stuff. And that series, yeah, definitely that deserves a much wider readership. It's got great reviews. People love it. But it's maybe not got the awareness that it deserves. Apart from that, I'm just reading fellow Titan author Stark Holborn. She's got a series, 2 books called Hell's 8 and Tenlo and Hell's 8. They're kind of futuristic space westerns, which are amazing and which I think will do very well. So hopefully they will. The books I've really been enjoying Adrian Tchaikovsky's last 2 trilogies, but I mean, he hardly needs me to give him a shout out there because he's doing amazingly well with those. So.
Yeah, those are both definitely on my radar, Tchaikovsky and Diane series. So yeah, that's fantastic. Might we see any? You know, you might be able to spill the beans. Might we see any collaborations between Diane and yourself in the future on a sci-fi book?
We've hit some ideas back and forward. We've got our own stuff to work on at the moment, but sometime definitely would love to do that.
Yeah. That'd be awesome.
I imagine there's got to be some ideas that you've both come up with and neither one of you can actually claim. So to be able to put those together into one would be, I'm sure it's going to be amazing.
Be a lot of fun,
yeah. The time always flies on these, but before we let you go, I like to finish off the episodes with the last question. And that question is, what was your first job?
What was my first job? Well, probably a hospital cleaner. When I was in what we call the 6th form, which is over here, which is 17, 18, studying for my final high school exams. I used to work on the weekends in the local hospital, just cleaning and sweeping and hoovering and stuff for beer money for the evening. And,
what did you learn from that experience, or what did you take away from that experience that's carried with you throughout your life?
That people doing essential jobs tend to be a lot lower paid than people doing non-essential ones. And that the reality is messy and smelly, and looking after people is a really good thing to do. And working for things that don't benefit people is just a complete waste of time.
Well, we want to thank you again we know you're very busy, so thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. We really, really appreciate it. But before we go, can you tell everyone where to find you? Where's the best place to find you and your work?
My website is www.garethlpowell.com. There's links there. Or I'm on Instagram as @GarethLPowell. I'm on what remains of Twitter as @GarethLPowell. And there's links on there to a link tree which has all my social media and my books and all sorts. And I run online masterclasses as well in creative writing. So there's links to those as well.
Awesome. So PL, before we go, can you tell us where people can find you and your work?
Books, www.plstore.com. Social media preferred handle is, as Gareth said, Twitter @plstorewrite. Beside you and Taylor, of course, I'm page chewing again. I'm an assistant editor with Before We Go blog, so reviews on Before We Go blog and on Goodreads. Hope to have a review up on Light Chaser in the coming weeks. It's great, and plan to read, definitely get more of Gareth's work. I quickly want to say, Gareth, one thing that we didn't get a chance, unfortunately, to talk about is that, Gareth, again, too modest, but he's wonderfully inspirational on social media. He's someone who boosts fellow writers and is very much an active member of the writing community in terms of social media, and really helps us all out, and is very positive, and is just one of those, when people think of really successful writers, sometimes you think they might be a bit, standoffish, or, may not. But this is someone who obviously gives back and cares about people. So thank you for all you do, Gareth, for that. So I just wanted to say that definitely has not gone, unrecognized by me, and I'm sure a lot of other people. So thank you.
Thank you.
And Taylor?
So you can find me on my BookTube channel, Made Between the Pages. It's written below. I also host page chewing on my channel, so you can find episodes over there as well. You can find my reviews on Before We Go blog, where I'm assistant editor, just like PL mentioned. I am also on the bare bones, what is left of Twitter. I'm still hanging in there along with others in this chat, it appears. But you can always find those links in the descriptions of my video. And I do just want to say again, thank you so much for coming. I know Steve already mentioned we know you're busy, but it means a lot that you took the time to talk to us. And I'll have you've sold me on your books, like Embers of War. Here I come. Character-based reader, I'm all over that. So
The system
I really I really look forward to getting to it, truly.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for coming by, and also thanks to everyone in the chat for interacting with us. It always makes it a great experience. So thanks to everyone for tuning in or listening, and all the links will be down below in the description, whether it's on the podcast or on YouTube. So be sure and check all those out. So until next time, hope everyone has a great rest of their day.